Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Now we'll be analyzing the Hindu newspaper, New Delhi edition dated 17th of September 2018. The news articles to be discussed today has been presented on the screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us start our today's discussion. Now this is an editorial article which appears on page number 8. The title of the article is The Rupee Problem. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 under the subsection Indian Economy and Various Issues. Now let us understand the context of this particular article. Now as you know that the rupee is depreciating, wherein rupee has lost almost about 12% since the beginning of year with respect to dollar. For example, the present value of rupee is hovering to around 72 per dollar. Further, there is also an increase in the current account deficit, where the current account deficit is approximately around 2.4% of the GDP. Now, this current account deficit is considered to be higher. You can better understand this by looking at the graph given below. As you can see, the value of the rupee was approximately equal to 65 at the start of the financial year. On the other hand, the value of the rupee has now come down to 71.86 as on 14th of September. So hence there has been a drastic fall in the value of rupee. Further, the trade deficit in India has remained quite high, and as you can see in this diagram, the trade deficit is approximately equal to $17.4 billion. This higher trade deficit has in turn contributed to higher current account deficit. So in order to counter the rupee depreciation as well as increase in the current account deficit, the Finance Minister of India has recently announced 5 measures. So it is in this particular aspect, this editorial analyzes the impact of these measures on the Indian economy. So as part of this video analysis, we shall try to understand as to what are the measures taken by the Finance Minister, and more importantly as to why these measures are taken. And then we'll analyze the impact of these measures on the Indian economy. And finally, the way forward with respect to these measures. Now let's start with the first topic as to what are the measures taken by the Finance Minister. Now these 5 measures which are announced by the Finance Minister are based on certain broad principles. The main idea here is the government intends to attract more dollar inflows into the country. As the dollar inflow into the country increases, the dollar supply would increase. This would lead to reduction in the value of dollar. As the dollar value reduces, the rupee value increases. That is, the rupee value appreciates. And hence, by attracting more dollar inflows into the country, the rupee depreciation in India can be countered. So having understood the broad principles on which these measures are based, let us look at these principles one by one. Now the first measure which the government has taken here is to encourage foreign portfolio investment in the bond market in India. Now this has been done by removing certain restrictions which were imposed on FPI investment in the bond market. Now as you know, the Indian companies can issue corporate bond in order to raise capital, and this capital can be raised even from the foreign portfolio investments. Now with respect to the earlier restriction, the foreign portfolios in India were not allowed to invest more than 20% of their funds in the corporate bonds issued in India. Let's understand this by looking at an example. Let's say a foreign portfolio investment has a total funds of $100. Now according to the earlier restriction, the FPI can invest only less than $20 in a single Indian company with respect to the corporate bond. Now the first measure which the government has taken in order to promote dollar inflows is this particular restriction on the FPI has now been removed, wherein now the FPIs can invest greater than 20% on a bond which has been issued by an Indian company, and hence this measure of the government would promote dollar inflows into the country. Now with respect to second measure, the government has decided to ease the norms for external commercial borrowings with respect to the Indian manufacturing companies. Before understanding as to what norms have been eased, let us first understand the concept of external commercial borrowings. Now, under external commercial borrowings, the companies in India can borrow loans from commercial institutions in foreign countries. Now, some of these commercial institutions may be banks, investment companies, pension, as well as mutual fund companies. So since here the companies are borrowing money from commercial institutions in foreign countries, they are referred to as external commercial borrowings. Now with respect to earlier restriction on external commercial borrowing for the Indian manufacturing companies, these companies were allowed to borrow loans only with a maturity period of 3 years. Now this particular restriction has now been removed. Now these manufacturing companies have been allowed to borrow loans with a maturity period of up to 1 year. Now why this is important is for the loans whose maturity period was greater than 3 years, the rate of interest on loans was little higher. However, on the loans whose maturity period is up to 1 year, the rate of interest on loans is comparatively lesser. Hence, this particular measure would enable the Indian manufacturing companies to borrow loans at a lesser rate, which would in turn promote dollar inflows into the country. Now, coming to the third measure. Now, under this measure, the government has said that it will review the mandatory hedging cost for the infrastructure loans which are borrowed under external commercial borrowings. Now, what this means is there are certain risks associated with respect to external commercial borrowings, and such risk can arise due to exchange rate fluctuations. So, in order to minimize this risk, the Reserve Bank of India had laid on mandatory hedging requirements. Now, hedging here, it is mainly done in the financial market in order to avoid any kind of risk with respect to investment. However, this mandatory requirement of hedging was leading to a problem. And the problem here was it was leading to the additional cost for the external commercial borrowings. Now, as per the new guidelines, the government has stated that the mandatory hedging would not be needed. Now, this would in turn lead to reduction in the cost of borrowings, thus promoting the dollar inflows into the country. Now, coming to the fourth measure, the government has decided to give an exception to the masala bonds from the withholding tax up to March 31st, 2019. Now, with respect to masala bonds, a company based in India can issue a bond which is denominated in terms of rupees to the institutions based in other countries. And by issuing a rupee denominated masala bond, a Indian company can borrow money from the other countries. It is similar to the corporate bond except the fact that this bond is denominated in terms of rupees. Now, according to the new guideline, there has been an exception to the withholding tax. What this means is that there will be no tax incidence on the foreign investors whenever they buy the masala bonds. Now, this particular guideline will help Indian economy in mainly two ways. Firstly, it will promote greater investment into India, and secondly, it would reduce the risk of exchange rate fluctuations on the Indian company. Now, coming to the fifth measure, the government has decided that the banks in India would be able to act as market makers. Now, market makers means creating market for the masala bonds, and this can be done by enabling the banks to buy and sell the masala bonds on behalf of the investor. Now, this particular aspect of enabling the banks to act as market makers would give a boost to the masala bond market in India. Now, having discussed about the 5 measures implemented by the government, let us see as to what the author of this particular article states with respect to these measures. Now, the author of this particular article states that these 5 measures which are implemented by the government can solve the immediate crisis with respect to the rupee depreciation and current account deficit. However, the author cautions the government that these measures can be used only in the short-term purposes. However, in the long term, the author states that the government has to focus on certain fundamental reasons for this particular problem of rupee depreciation. The author has mainly identified 2 aspects. Firstly, he has stated that the government has to promote exports from India. And secondly, he has said that the government has to reduce the dependence on oil imports from the other countries, which can be done by searching for alternate fuels. So, boosting of exports and reducing the imports into India would ensure the dollar inflows into India will increase. And this higher dollar inflows into India would ensure the stability of the rupee. Now, as part of this topic, we have discussed the 5 measures taken by the government in order to check rupee depreciation, why these measures have been taken, the impact of these measures, and the way forward as suggested by the author in this particular editorial. Let us now look at some of the questions which have been asked in the previous year UPSC prelims with respect to this particular topic. Now, this was a question asked in the prelims 2011. The question was, consider the following actions which the government can take: devaluing the domestic currency, reduction in export subsidy, adopting suitable policies which attract greater FDI and more funds from FIIs. Which of the above action can help in reducing the current account deficit? Now, devaluing the domestic currency would enable a country to boost its exports. Adopting policies for attracting FDI would lead to more of dollar inflows into the country. On the other hand, reduction in the export subsidy would lead to reduction in the exports. So hence, in order to reduce the current account deficit, we need to boost the exports as well as promote more dollar inflows. And hence the answer in this particular case happens to be option D, that is 193 only. Now coming to the second question which was asked in the prelims 2016. The question was, with reference to masala bonds sometimes seen in the news, which of the statements given below is or are correct? The first statement is International Finance Corporation, which offers these bonds, is an arm of World Bank, which is correct. The second statement is they are rupee denominated bonds and are a source of debt financing for the public and private sector, which is also correct. So hence in this particular case the answer happens to be C, that is both 1 and 2. Let us now move to the next article. Now this particular article has been taken from the front page. The title of the article is More River Stretches Are Now Critically Polluted, Central Pollution Control Board. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Environment under the subsection Conservation, Environmental Pollution and Degradation. Now this particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of assessment of the pollution in the Indian rivers which has been carried out by Central Pollution Control Board. As part of this assessment, the Central Pollution Control Board has measured the extent of pollution in the Indian rivers based on biochemical oxygen demand, which stands for BOD. Now this biochemical oxygen demand is a measure of dissolved oxygen in the water which is used by the aerobic microorganisms in order to dissolve the organic content. Now why this BOD is important is because this BOD is considered to be an important measure of water quality of the rivers. That is, if the BOD value of the rivers is higher, it means that the rivers have higher organic content, that is the food which is available for the bacteria. Now this means that whenever the BOD value of the water bodies increases, this is an indicator of higher pollution of the water bodies. Let us look at the highlights of this particular report. Now this particular report is based upon the BOD classification. Now according to this particular report, if a water body has less than 3 mg per liter of BOD, only then the river would be categorized as healthy river. Else, if the BOD is greater than 3 mg per liter, in that case it is categorized as a polluted river. Now this aspect of classifying rivers into healthy as well as polluted based upon the BOD becomes extremely important from the prelims perspective. Let us now look at the highlights of the particular report. Now according to this particular report, the number of polluted stretches in India has increased to 352 from 302 in the last 2 years. Further, the report also states that the number of critically polluted stretches has increased to 45 from 35, wherein majority of these critically polluted stretches are mainly found in 3 states of Maharashtra, Assam and Gujarat, wherein these 3 states account for almost 117 of 351 polluted stretches in India. Now these aspects of the report can be seen in this particular diagram. As you can see here, Maharashtra and Assam have the highest number of polluted stretches on the rivers, wherein Maharashtra accounts for 53 stretches whereas Assam accounts for 44 stretches. Further, you can see here that the Pawai Dharavi stretch of the Mithi river in Mumbai is considered to be the most polluted river in India. Further, it states that because of the cultural significance enjoyed by river Ganga, the focus of the government has so far been on cleaning this particular river. However, this aspect of the government's focus has led to neglect of other rivers in India, as evident in the fact that the most critically polluted stretches are found in Maharashtra, Assam and Gujarat. Now these are certain aspects of the report which become important from the exam perspective. Further, from the exam perspective, you would also be required to know about Central Pollution Control Board. Now this Central Pollution Control Board is a statutory organization. Statutory here, it means that it has been created under a law passed by the Parliament. And this particular organization has been set up under Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. When it comes to powers and functions of this particular organization, the powers and functions have been enumerated in the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. Now, functions of Central Pollution Control Board are to promote cleanliness of streams and wells in different areas of the states through prevention, control, and abatement of water pollution. Further, it also seeks to improve the quality of air and to prevent, control, and abatement of air pollution in the country. Now, let's look at one of the prelims question in the year 2018 related to this particular topic. The question was, how is National Green Tribunal different from Central Pollution Control Board? The first statement was, the National Green Tribunal has been established by an act, whereas Central Pollution Control Board has been created by an executive order of the government. Now, as discussed, the Central Pollution Control Board is a statutory organization, and hence this particular statement is wrong. Now, coming to the second statement, it says that the National Green Tribunal provides environmental justice and helps reduce the burden of litigation in the higher courts, whereas Central Pollution Control Board promotes cleanliness of streams and wells and aims to improve the quality of air in the country. This we have already discussed, and hence this particular statement is right. So in this particular case, the answer happens to be B, that is 2 only. Now a question for your practice would be, consider the following statements related to water pollution. The first statement is, higher the biochemical oxygen demand, lower would be the pollution of water bodies. The second statement is, according to Central Pollution Control Board, if the biochemical oxygen demand of the river is less than 3 mg per liter, it is treated as healthy river. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? Please give your answer in the comment section given below. Now, having understood about various facets of this particular article, let's move to the next one. Now, this particular topic has been taken from the editorial page number 8. The title of the topic is Lethal Filth. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS paper 2, that is governance, under the subsection of government policies and intervention in the development of various sectors. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of death of manual scavengers recently in Delhi and Odisha. Now, this is important because presently employment of people to clean septic tanks is prohibited under a law passed by the parliament, and this law is Prohibition of Employment as Manual Scavengers and Their Rehabilitation Act 2013. It is in this particular aspect, the article basically focuses on 2 aspects. Firstly, it highlights as to what are the problems with respect to implementation of this particular law, and secondly, it provides certain suggestions as to how the implementation of this particular law can be improved upon. Let us first understand as to what is the present law on manual scavenging. Now, this particular law mainly provides for 2 things. Firstly, it provides for prohibition of employment of people as manual scavengers, and secondly, it provides for rehabilitation of manual scavengers along with their families. Further, the section 7 of this particular act prohibits any person, local authority or any agency from employing people for hazardous cleaning of sewers and septic tanks, wherein violation of this particular provision, that is section 7 of this particular act, provides for imprisonment which may extend to 2 years. Now, with respect to rehabilitation of manual scavengers, this is provided under section 13, wherein the municipalities in India are required to identify the manual scavengers and provide for their rehabilitation. However, this particular article highlights that the section 7, which provides for employment of people as manual scavengers, this particular section is not properly enforced and people are in turn forced to do manual scavenging. Further, this article highlights that these problems could worsen further on account of Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, because as part of Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the government is constructing more number of septic tanks for the toilets in both rural areas as well as urban areas. So because of construction of more number of septic tanks, it would lead to more employment of manual scavengers. Wherein this article highlights that This would in turn lead to death of the people as it had happened in Delhi and Odisha recently. So the article highlights that there has to be a political will as well as social pressure in order to ensure a proper implementation of law on manual scavenging. This article has also given certain suggestions as to how this law on manual scavenging can be implemented properly. Firstly, this article says that this particular law has to be implemented in both letter and spirit. It means that the government should ensure that no person is employed as manual scavengers. Further, in case of employment of a person by any agency, it should provide for punishment. Secondly, the article says that the government should try to employ machines for the cleaning of septic tanks in India. And lastly, this particular article states that under the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the government should create dedicated funds, and these funds should be in turn used for scientific management of the tanks, which would avoid the employment of manual scavengers. Now, these are the three suggestions given in this article in order to implement this particular law properly. Now, a practice question for your mains would be: the practice of manual scavenging has to be completely abolished in India. In this context, analyze the various problems in the implementation of the law on manual scavenging. Also suggest certain measures to improve the implementation of this law, wherein you can try writing answer to this particular question by looking at the video analysis of this particular article. Now, having understood about the Manual Scavenging Act, its problems and the way forward, let us now move to the next article. Now, this is the lead article which appears on page number 8. The title of the article is Where Goes the Rupee? This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3, Economy, under the subsection Indian Economy and Various Issues. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of drastic fall in the value of rupee, which has already been discussed in the first article of today's DNS. However, this particular article is different in terms of its focus as compared to the first article which we have discussed, wherein this particular article basically focuses on two aspects. Firstly, it tries to highlight as to what are the reasons for the fall in the value of rupee. Secondly, it tries to analyze as to what are the policy options before the government in order to check the rupee depreciation. Now, with respect to the reason for fall in the value of rupee, this article highlights that the main reason is with respect to external environment and not because of any problem with respect to the Indian economy. Now, with respect to the reasons for the fall in the value of rupee, this article highlights that the higher dollar outflow from India due to the external environment has led to the depreciation in the value of rupee. Now, with respect to higher dollar outflows, this article has mainly attributed this to two reasons. Now, coming to the first reason. Now, here the article has highlighted that the GDP growth rate in US has increased. Further, the rate of interest in USA has also increased. Now, because of this, the foreign investors who had so far invested their money in the emerging economies are now reinvesting their money back into USA, leading to higher dollar inflows in USA and shortage of dollars in the emerging economies. Now, this shortage of dollars in the emerging economies has in turn led to depreciation in the value of their currencies. And hence, even India is one among those emerging economies which have got affected because of the higher GDP growth rate and higher interest rate in USA. Now, the second reason for the fall in the value of rupee is because of increase in the international crude oil prices, wherein the international crude oil prices have increased from $45 per barrel to $80 per barrel. Now, because of this increase in the international crude oil prices, the dollar outflow from India has increased. So, this particular article argues that the fall in the value of rupee is mainly on account of external environment. Let us now try to understand as to what are the policy options in order to check the fall in the value of rupee. Now, this particular article suggests that the RBI has mainly two options in order to check rupee depreciation. The first option here is that RBI should go for rupee revaluation. Now, under rupee revaluation, the RBI should inject more dollars into the economy. When more number of dollars are injected into the economy, the dollar supply in Indian economy would increase. This would lead to reduction in the value of dollar and hence the rupee value would increase. Now, this increase in the value of rupee which takes place due to RBI's intervention is known as rupee revaluation. Now, the second option before the RBI is RBI can increase the policy rates, that is the rate of interest, as part of its monetary policy. By increasing the policy rates, RBI would be able to control the inflation and hence the rupee depreciation can be controlled. However, the article highlights that both option 1 as well as option 2 has certain problems. Now with respect to first option, the problem here is RBI would be required to inject the dollars and these dollars shall be injected from the forex reserves. So rupee revaluation in this particular case would lead to depletion of forex reserves. Now with respect to second option, the problem here is if the RBI increases the interest rates in India, this would lead to decrease in the investment rates and the lower investment rates would lead to decrease in the GDP growth rate of India. So this article highlights that both these options have problems associated with them. So this article rules out both of these options and instead it argues for NRI bonds in India. Let us try to understand about these bonds. Now, NRI bonds are similar to the bonds issued in India, except the fact that these bonds are issued by the Reserve Bank of India in order to attract dollar inflows from the non-resident Indians across the world. Now, these bonds have certain peculiar features. The first feature being these bonds are purchased by non-resident Indians by using foreign currency. The second one is usually the maturity period of such bonds is greater than 3 years. And lastly, these bonds offer attractive interest rate in order to attract the NRIs. When rupee was facing a crisis way back in the year 2013, the RBI had gone for issuance the NRI bonds. So this particular article argues that even in 2018, in order to check the crisis in the Indian rupee, the RBI can go for issuance of NRI bonds. Now, having understood as to what are the reasons for the fall in the value of rupee and the policy options before the RBI, let us now move to the next article. Now, this particular article appears on page number 11. The title of the article is Central Information Commissioner wants breakup of how MPLAD funds are utilized. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Governance under the subsection Government Policies and Interventions. Now, this particular article has appeared in the context of the filing of RTI with the Central Information Commissioner. Under this RTI, two petitioners had asked details about the funds spent in the various districts under the MPLADS scheme. Now this MPLADS scheme stands for Member of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme. Now to this particular RTI, the centre has responded that it does not maintain constituency-wise and work-wise details of the money spent under this particular scheme. So it is in this particular aspect the Centre Information Commissioner has asked the Lok Sabha Speaker as well as the Rajya Sabha Chairman to come out with a legal framework governing the implementation of MPLAD scheme. Let us now try to understand about the Member of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme. Now, under this particular scheme, each member of the parliament is allocated 5 crores every year. The elected members of the Lok Sabha can recommend for works to be implemented in their constituency. When it comes to the elected MPs of Rajya Sabha, they can recommend works in the state from where they are elected. However, for the nominated MPs of both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they can recommend the works to be implemented in any part of the country. Now the second aspect related to this particular scheme is the funds which are given under the MPLAD scheme are non-lapsable funds, which means the money which is unspent at the end of the financial year gets carried over to the next financial year. Thirdly, this particular scheme is under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now, this particular article says that Centre Information Commission has provided for a legal framework for MPLAD scheme. Let us look at the legal framework. Now, this particular legal framework, which is suggested by Centre Information Commissioner, will have mainly 3 objectives. Firstly, it would ensure proper implementation of the MPLAD scheme. Secondly, it would ensure the accountability of the parliamentarians. And thirdly, it would provide for improved transparency through the information disclosure. Now, these aspects of having a legal framework is important because presently almost around 12,000 crores under this MPLAD scheme has remained unspent. Now, apart from the legal framework, the Centre Information Commissioner has also provided for disclosure of spending under the MPLAD scheme. Now, as part of disclosure of spending, all the members of parliament and political parties would be required to present the public as well as the Parliament with a comprehensive report on the number of applications received for the constituency, the works recommended, the works rejected along with the reasons, the progress of the work, and the details of the beneficiaries. Further, the legal framework should also prohibit and prevent the MPs from using the funds for their private works or diverting them to private trust or to their own relatives. And finally, it says that the district administrations must provide regular information on the basis of work, MP wise and year wise details on the progress needs to be compiled by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation and shall be made available to the public. So as part of this article, we have mainly focused on three aspects, that is what exactly is MPLADS scheme, the legal framework for the MPLADS scheme as suggested by Center Information Commission, and the third one being the disclosure of spending for the MPLADS scheme in order to ensure the transparency and accountability. Now, having understood about these aspects, let us now move to the next article. Now, this particular article appears on the editorial page number 9. The title of the article is Transforming Agriculture. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Environment under the subsection Conservation, Environmental Pollution and Degradation. Now, this particular article has appeared in the context of India's biodiversity being under threat mainly from two aspects, that is climate change as well as the development. Hence, in order to protect the biodiversity in India, the government has come up with a plan known as National Biodiversity Action Plan. Now, this Biodiversity Action Plan would ensure that there is development in India without threatening the biodiversity. Now, this particular article focuses on an initiative known as Green Agricultural Project, which is an initiative of Indian government and an international organization known as Food and Agriculture Organization. Now, this particular Green Agriculture Project would be in turn supporting the National Biodiversity Action Plan in order to protect the biodiversity in India. So, let us understand some basic details related to the Green Agricultural Project. Now, as discussed, the Green Agriculture Project is mainly implemented by the Indian government and Food and Agriculture Organization. Now, the purpose of this particular project is mainly twofold. Firstly, it ensures that the agricultural production in India should protect and preserve the biodiversity. On the other hand, the agricultural production should also lead to development. So, it is in this particular aspect the Green Agriculture Project seeks to bring about synergy among the biodiversity conservation, the agricultural production, as well as the development needs of India. Now, here, in order to ensure that the agricultural production in India leads to biodiversity conservation, it would mainly focus on three aspects. The first one being it would address the land degradation. The second is it would provide for sustainable forest management. And third one being it would address issues related to biodiversity conservation. So by focusing on these aspects, it will be not only be able to provide for conservation of biodiversity, it would also provide for the development in India, thus bringing about a synergy among the three components. Now coming to the third point, now this particular project is currently implemented in the 5 landscapes adjoining the protected areas or reserves, and these states are Madhya Pradesh, Mizoram, Odisha, Rajasthan and Uttarakhand. Let us now look at some of the examples of Green Agriculture Project. The first example is eradication of invasive alien species. The second example is by preventing man-animal conflict. And the third one here is agro-biodiversity guardians. Now this means here, under this project, the role of small farmers is being strengthened in order to preserve and protect indigenous varieties of rice. Now this is an example which has been followed in the state of Odisha. Now these are some of the aspects which you need to remember with respect to Green Agriculture Project. Now a question for your practice would be, which of the following are the regions in biodiversity hotspots of India? Nilgiri Hills, Run of Kutch and Nicobar Island. Please go through the question and give your answer in the comment section given below. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us look at the question for the day.